Hi, welcome to another episode of Alto Heron. My name is Rob Runacres and I'm here with my friend and colleague Hans Jodlin.
Hello, and I will introduce our guest. Today we have the famous Captain America himself, Jake Norwood.
Hello, good evening.
Hey Jake, how are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay, Jake, can you tell us a bit about your background
Sure. Wow, it's a broad question. From a historical European martial arts perspective, from a historical sword fighting perspective, I started this about 15 years ago, give or take, literally a week after I was married, which you can imagine went over smashingly. And so I think as an adult, this has been a key part of my life all along. Prior to that, let's see. What else about my background that kind of stands out? I'm a veteran. I served two fairly long tours in Iraq with the U.S. Army. I currently work as a management consultant in operational cybersecurity, which sounds pretty exciting, but really comes down to just running operations, which is something that I'm pretty good at, I guess. I grew up in and around the U.S. military, so I'm what we call a military brat. There's no one place that I can really particularly call home. And even now, my parents still continue to move around. So a while back, I went home to visit them for Christmas in California, and now I go home to visit them for Christmas in North Carolina. I've got two children, Arland, a 3-year-old boy, and Illyria, a 9-year-old girl. Yeah, I don't know what else to throw in there, except that I've been to a lot of places, and I want to be a whole lot more places. And one of the best things about this community is I get to do that.
So, okay, well, let's look at your military background here. Do you think it's this that's actually got you into HEMA, or was this more, say, a childhood thing? A lot of people get into it through anything from liking history through to Robin Hood or something like that. What was it that really gave you the urge to actually get into something historical as well as martial?
So, swords are freaking cool, man. And I think my whole life I was fascinated by this. When I was, maybe 16 years old, I stumbled across, I lived in California at the time, and I stumbled across an SCA group practicing in the park, and I'd never seen anything like that, and got very, very excited. Oh my gosh, there's guys in armor sword fighting. And so I hung out with those guys for a couple of months. I bought a cheap pair of, suit of like beater armor, ran around hitting people with a rattan stick for maybe 3 months, something like that. And then my family moved and to Tennessee, and I tried an SCA chapter in Tennessee, and they got mad at me for hitting too hard, like consistently, like, you hit too hard, stop. And I said, I don't know, I'm just hitting. I don't know what you mean. And so kind of fell out of it from there. And I never got into any of the other kind of aspects of that organization. But it left a mark on me, right? I wanted to sword fight. I thought that was really, really cool stuff. So fast forward a couple of years later, and I'm in college. It's my second year in college, which is actually several years after I'd started college. After my first year in college, I had gone and served a mission for the LDS Church in Poland. While in Poland, I had fallen in love with the history there and the culture there, and I got very excited about this idea of like Polish saber. So when I came home from Poland, and this is in like 99, like early 99, I started looking, voraciously for someone who could teach me how to fight with a Polish saber, right, a big curved cavalry sword. And fencing classes weren't going to cut it. I could tell right away. And so I thought actually about looking at the SCA again because I didn't have any kind of other frame of reference. And I had heard there was a group of dudes practicing sword fighting in the park, and I kind of rolled my eyes. I figured it was boffer fighting or LARPing, something like that. And that's just not what I wanted to get involved in. And at that point in time, I by sheer coincidence had a mutual friend, ran into a guy named Robert Hyatt, who was leading the local HACA, Historical Armed Combat Association chapter, and that was actually the group that was referenced, as it turned out. And that was my first brush with historical martial arts, as such as was their state in the time. So I got very excited. I went to one class. I learned some basic longsword stuff, as the state of the art was back in '99, or I guess this is like the first week of 2000, and it blew my mind, to be entirely honest. Could not believe how cool this stuff was. Went home super excited, borrowed a waster, and Rob Hyatt, not knowing me from Adam, was kind enough to lend me one, and started training with it literally every single day in the basic kind of stuff that they had showed me that night, and really have not turned back since.
Well, you seem to have you've gone very much along this sort of European historical route quite fortuitously. I mean, a lot of people that are our hands. I mean, for me, I had kind of like sports fencing and also the standard, Eastern Asian martial arts background as a kid, and then that developed, and I kind of discovered HEMA as well, that it was possible. Yeah. I mean, did you have any sort of earlier interest? I mean, or has it always been European basically? Have you not been interested about, say, Central Asian or Far Eastern or anything like that?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that after watching the first Ninja Turtles movie, that inspired me to get like a yellow belt in karate as a 12-year-old or something. I'm pretty sure that happened. I kind of vaguely remember that. But otherwise, no, I never really did. I was, and this actually connects to the military question too. I was not a tremendously active, I wasn't like an athlete. Like, I was clumsy, and I was the last picked in sports, and I never really physically, came into my own to any degree at all until high school. And suddenly I learned there was this sport where I could just like slam my body into people really hard, called football, American football, and I was good at that. I couldn't catch a ball to save my life, still can't. Can't throw a ball to save my life, but I could slam into a dude real good. And so that was the first time I ever actually realized that like my body could do things physically. And then not much more came of that, and I was sort of afraid I would end up being a video game playing, role-playing game playing couch potato for the rest of my life. And stumbling across, longsword in particular, as a 22-year-old, changed everything, right? You suddenly gave me a reason to work out, a reason to do all that stuff, and that sort of perversely led to my joining the a couple of years later. The emphasis on what we would call physical culture, right, on exercise and fitness, and this idea of a warrior being one who closes with the enemy, were all things that I had become familiar with through historical fencing and wanting to be like the best sword fighter ever. And so those things physically and mentally prepared me later when I decided I wanted to join the military, when I wanted to follow in my father's and his father's footsteps, something that had not interested me my entire life previously, made that possible. So in sort of a weird way, HEMA led to the Army, not the other way around. And there were really no other martial arts there in between. I took a semester of judo or jujitsu at one point because I wanted to up my ringen game. I wanted to get a perspective on that. But I really came by the European martial arts kind of organically. I wasn't a kung fu guy. I wasn't a fencer. I wasn't a wrestler. Nothing along those lines. It was all swords all the time.
Okay, coming back to talking about Haka or Arma, as they were, they changed the name to. I was also a member of Haka and Arma. But how long were you a member in Arma?
Probably 8 years or so.
Yeah. Okay. So, and many people know about Arma as a group, but maybe they don't really know the influence that they actually have on HEMA. Actually, can you talk about more the way you trained and what your role was in?
Yeah, absolutely. Arma, Haka before, as you mentioned, and then Arma is. It's a difficult subject to talk about. There's a lot of emotional. It's a very emotionally charged topic for a lot of people, which I think is in and of itself kind of ridiculous. But I've been there. So in what I would say are the early days of American HEMA, and I want to kind of differentiate from other attempts at things that you could probably call HEMA. Like there was an entire sort of Western martial arts movement, and there have been reenactors and SCA guys and stage fencers and all kinds of people interested in things that we would call HEMA now, right? So that's existed for a long time. But the early days of the HEMA community as it more or less exists now, I think really started getting on the ground in like the very late 90s, like 99. Yeah. And in 2000, I think it was, the HACA, later the ARMA, was one of the primary stakeholders in an event called Sword Symposium International, and this happened right before I started up. And that was both kind of the beginning and the end of the American HEMA scene at the time, because a whole bunch of folks that later would become rivals or enemies, or at least not friends on Facebook, all came together in a single location, I think in Houston, Texas, and to sort of have the first American, what we would think of now as like a HEMA event, right, with classes and training and people showing each other what they know, and a bunch of fencing and sparring and that kind of stuff. No competition, but a lot of that stuff. And following that event, there was a huge falling out, largely due to personality conflicts and other things, and everyone who was there has a different take on it. But I think in that point in time, there was this big falling out, and really created a schism within the not yet mature American, historical European martial arts community. And as a result, you ended up with a couple of camps, and the two largest camps, that were organized in any way, were what you would think of as the guys who later started forming Western Martial Arts Workshop. That's Greg Melee and Christian Tobler and Sean Hayes, and at the time Bob Sharon, and a lot of these guys, sort of formed one kind of group of buddies over here. And then there was John Clements, right, and who picked up his toys and went off to do his own thing. And at the time, even more so than now, you joined the group that was around if there was one around, right? And if there wasn't one around, you joined the first group you ran into on the internet, because that's what you did. And so I feel both fortunate and cursed that I had run into what became the ARMA and John. At the time, John really was the trailblazer for what we would think of now as a lot of the modern values modern HEMAists espouse, right? A kind of sort of an aggressive approach to training, lots of physicality, lots of intent in your training, using lots of different types of training to triangulate into some kind of unattainable ideal, right? We can't go fight with sharp swords, but we can cut with sharps, and we can fence with padded swords, and we can fence with wooden swords at the time, or steel blunts. And so a lot of the ideas that became very important to what I think of now as the better side of modern HEMA practice were largely a result of those early guys, and very much of a lot of John Clements' writings. What happened over time, and I get into this because I kind of assume is the next question. What kind of happened over time is that as the HACA, the later ARMA, became more influential as a group and became larger as a group, it wasn't so easy anymore for John to really control what was going on within his organization. And this is something that a lot of maybe listeners have felt within their own clubs, especially right now that things are growing so quickly. You get used to having your community built a certain way. You get used to having maybe students who believe a certain way and train a certain way and have a certain interpretation of the sources, or a certain approach to interpreting the sources, and that's what you're comfortable with, and that's what you think is right. And then there's that guy who might be pretty good who doesn't agree with you. And then there's a schism. You see this within clubs pretty frequently, to be honest, right? And ARMA very much was, and maybe still is, a club. We talk about it as a super club, but really it was one club with one leader that happened to be broken up into a lot of segments in a lot of different places. And a couple of different things happened, and I'm going to stay away from some of the more kind of salacious stuff, but except to say that over time, Jean became increasingly isolationist in his approach to dealing with the outside world. He was always very, very critical, very critical, of literally every other group out there, except for a small handful of groups that he felt kind of trained like he did. He always had nice things to say, for example, about Matt Easton and Scala Gladiatoria and the Exiles in the early days, those kinds of things. But he generally had a very negative way of viewing other martial arts, other teachers, other and so on. Sometimes valid, sometimes simply biased or prejudiced. And as a result, you ended up with a couple of interesting phenomena. First, if you were a member of ARMA, you either adopted these same views, right? And then that kind of began to populate your interaction online, because at the time everybody was still talking to everybody, or you didn't really agree with a lot of these views, but you kind of kept to yourself because it wasn't that big a deal, because that's not why you were in it, right? You weren't in it for some kind of political drama, whatever. You were in it to train, and people can say whatever they want about whatever. Over time, as the organization became more isolationist, as John wanted an ever firmer grasp on what was taught and how it was taught, and what, you know, sort of ethical values, if you will, were espoused by the organization, as those things became more crystallized, they also became a lot less optional. They became a lot less flexible, and you started to see these series of kind of purges, where people who were perceived to be not as loyal to the organization, or people who were perceived as being not on board the training kind of approach, or the ethical valuation, those people were pushed out, and usually a pretty nasty slander campaign followed, internally primarily. So come late 2006 or so, I had come back from my first tour in Iraq. John asked me to be the deputy director of the ARMA, position which I felt very honored to be offered, and I accepted. And to be honest, contributed as much as I could, but I spent about half of my 2 years as deputy director in Iraq, which mostly meant that I could respond to issues several days late and a couple hours off time and whatnot. And so for only about a year was I really able to contribute in an especially meaningful fashion. So mostly I had a pretty good reputation within the organization. I was at that point a senior free scholar, which is at the time, was the sort of highest student rank attained, martially. And to take a little segue here, that was a big deal. It was a big deal to have an evaluation system and sort of a rank, and people can talk all they want about belts and about ranks within martial arts schools, but they can be motivating, and you can really feel like you've accomplished something when you did that, and I certainly did. And of course that also brings loyalty to the organization. I want to say also that I met and trained with just wonderful people in the ARMA. Most of those people have since been driven out or left, to be honest. But a handful haven't been, and are still there, and are still wonderful people. And so I would counsel anyone against blanketly judging ARMA members because they don't like John Clements or they don't like the organization's policies. A lot of people, they're there because their friends are there and they're loyal to their friends, or various other reasons. But anyway, so what happened was after being deputy director for a couple of years, I really felt like I couldn't do it anymore. I was kind of burned out. I didn't feel like one of my goals, which had been to kind of moderate some of John's more impulsive decisions, wasn't really succeeding, and I felt like I wasn't the right guy for the job. And so I very amicably backed out of that position. Aaron Pinnenberg came in and took the position. I felt Aaron was the best guy for the job. Had a very pleasant weekend with John and Aaron when we kind of traded hands. And then a couple of months after that, things just kind of continued to go south. What had really been going on to a large degree is that for several years I'd been kind of chafing at the isolationism that had come into the organization. I wanted to train with a lot of people outside of the ARMA, and that just wasn't something that you could freely do. Still, I think, isn't something that you could freely do within the organization without your loyalty coming into question, or did you show them ARMA's secrets? Did you, you're not competing in a tournament, are you? That kind of thing. And so the sort of dogma around the organization became an increasingly important part of it. And it wasn't. I felt like it was stunting my growth as a fencer. Combined with that, my relationship with John became increasingly strained, and I and a handful of others that I had trained with since my earliest days in the organization all chose to resign. The actual details of the resignation are actually pretty interesting, and David James Knight, who had resigned a little bit earlier, I think, chronicled all of this in his blog, and I tried to find it the other day and I can't, which is too bad because it's a sort of a contemporary account of what happened. But as a result, lots of people ended up either leaving the ARMA or getting kicked out of the ARMA because they were affiliated with us in some way. Maybe 100 people in a 400, 500 person organization. For example, the entire state of Utah, because all 4 of us that resigned had once lived in Utah, but none of us did anymore. The entire state of Utah was like exiled, poof, immediately. Coincidentally, in that grand exile was sort of included Mike Chittister of Wichtenauer fame, who had actually been kicked out of the Arma about a year earlier because, people didn't like him. People, mostly meaning John, didn't like him. But Chittister had actually gone on and continued to run that Arma group kind of in secret for many, many months, and because he was the guy running the group, and the club wasn't going to kick him out. So that sort of settled that. And everybody sort of ended up kind of scattering to the 4 winds. About the same time, John Mayshar, Jason Taylor contacted me and Stuart File and said, hey, we got this idea for a big nonprofit. Do you guys want to be involved? And that evolved into the HEMA Alliance, which is an incredibly long answer to your question, but hopefully covers some of the other questions that you were probably going to ask.
Possibly. I do have one question, though, coming from that. Maybe Hans has as well. In some ways, this is normal. This is a normal churn. There are examples which I won't go into in Europe. You may want to look towards Italy, where you see organizations with a very charismatic head that build up to a certain level and then start to fall apart. Either because, I guess, you've got an individual whose business relies on control, or you've got, as you were saying, you've got a natural churn, perhaps a natural falling apart, or you may have something you described. Do you feel that's actually something that is lacking in HEMA now? Is perhaps a level of humility? There are those of us who start to build up our own little empires, our own little clubs, and we start to see our students getting better and better, and in my case, kicking my ass quite regularly. People need to move on. But do you think this is, do we need to accept that this is going to happen regardless?
Yes, I think we do need to accept that this is part of it, and there's a lot of people out there who harbor some pretty strongly negative feelings towards John Clements, and I know a lot of their personal stories, and so I understand why. But to be honest, it was John's club. John can run John's club how John wants to run John's club. And I don't think anyone, including members, honestly, have a place to feel particularly butthurt about that. To be honest, you know what you're signing up for when you sign up. So I think in truth that John gets a lot of bad press for a lot of reasons, and all that said, his club is his club. I think we run into that same thing, in other clubs, as well, and I think it is part of the natural churn. I think we run into this scenario where, I can think of a couple examples with some friends that I have right now, and I'm friends with sort of both sides of this equation, where you had a very senior student and of a very well-known fencer who broke off to do his own club, and there were hurt feelings and all kinds of stuff built around that. But at the end of the day, we don't really have a vehicle within the community, a standardized way for a senior person to embark on their own. At some point, and I expect this will happen with me as well, somebody in my club will be like, I'm ready to start my own club. I want to do that. And sometimes some organizations say, sure, go for it. Set up another club. You can brand it similarly or not, your choice, whatever. We're all friends. We'll keep training. Where we think we run into the most trouble is when somebody's trying to make their livelihood from it. And in fact, almost every example I know of a really nasty split comes when money's involved. And that's not because money drives it, but money makes it personal in a way that it might not be otherwise. I don't think that, for example, I wasn't trying to take money out of John Clement's mouth when I left his club. That was the last thing for my mind. But I know, because he wrote this, that he interpreted it that way, that I was harming his livelihood in his family. And I can see how he might think that, but that's not why I did it. It had nothing to do with it. And I think that's true in a lot of these other cases as well. So my caution to people in the community is, if you're trying to make this a significant part of your livelihood, Don't be surprised when your students decide to move out. Don't be surprised when they don't want to pay you anymore. And don't be a little baby about it. That's, you know, I had a really great conversation with Jesse Kula, who's one of the head instructors over at Chicago Swordplay Guild, which has their Forteza school, which is a real full-time like gym that teaches, amongst other things, historical martial arts, Fiore particularly. And they have like a belting program, and it takes about 2 years, Jesse said, to get to their black belt, you know, kind of their black belt level. And he said the average student stays for 2 years and a month. Right, you know, if they go until they achieve that thing, and then they're gone, because they've achieved whatever it is that they want to achieve. As a community, we're much more amorphous, right? We don't really have standardized rankings of any sort across the community. And so, at what point does a person know that they've achieved the thing they wanted to achieve? Well, if what you wanted to achieve is being a teacher, at some point you just got to go be a teacher. You just got to go run the club your own way. You get tired of being underneath your very well-intentioned instructor's thumb. So yeah, I think it's a natural churn, and I think it's healthy. And I mostly just would hope that teachers would quit taking this as some kind of personal slight, and that students who leave don't feel like it needs to be personal. Like they feel like they can shake hands and be like, high five, good job, buddy, and off they go.
But do you think we're in some way doomed in that sometimes the discussions I have around the, well, to give you a good example, a guy I very admire is Alberto Bonprezzi, who's one of the big fencers in Spain, and he is always researching, always reassessing. He'll turn around to his senior guys and go, look, I think I've got this wrong, which is a level of humility I would hope that many of us aspire to. Do you feel, though, that many of us reach a level where we're afraid to admit we're wrong, and that perpetuates some of these breakups that we have?
I would love to say no, but yeah, I've seen it. I've definitely seen it, and I think you're right. I think, I mean, for crying out loud, man, we have no idea for sure what these guys did, right? I mean, you know, for most of the things that we refer to when we tend to refer to HEMA, right? We don't really know for sure how any of this stuff is done. We got some pretty damn confident guesses at this point. You know, but honestly, any interpreter of historical martial arts who is not at least annually being like, I think I've been doing this wrong, is probably full of crap. And it's one of my red flags when talking to people. Anybody who says that they, you know, that has that confidence of like religion, that this is the right way, this is the best way, this is the whatever way. I get real sketchy about that, right? Like, I don't know. Like I got a shield house that I think is pretty awesome. But I'll be honest. If somebody came to me and said like, hey, look, here's proof your shield house is wrong. I'd be like, damn, that sucks. Back to the drawing board. And I'd argue with them about it for hours. It wouldn't go that fast, but but I revise all this stuff all the time, and I think anybody who's not doing that, honestly, needs to ask themselves, why are they doing this, right? Like, what are you in this for, right? If you just want to be like a cool sword fighter, go LARP, man. Like, go pick up a padded sword and, you know, shout fireball and throw a football at a dude. Like, I don't even care. But yeah.
Okay, Hans?
Okay. Yeah, it seems that when you left Arma, you didn't really, you weren't very diminished. You know, you hadn't lost your passion for fencing, right? You felt like you wanted to create something new. Or did you have a plan to create a new club right away, or?
Yeah. So my first plan was what I was going to do locally, and that was a discussion that Ben Michaels and I had, you know, for about. I mean, from decision to leave to actual departure was 2 weeks at the most. There was no point in delaying departure, right? I just mostly wanted to make sure I had my ducks in a row before I did it, and I had a chance to tell all the people in my club, hey, listen, there's a good chance you're going to get in a lot of trouble because of something I'm about to do. You know, so I didn't spend a lot of time doing that. But yeah, the first thing was, you know, what are we going to do as a local club? And of all the people that were in the ARMA club in DC, Ben Michaels was the only one that decided to follow me out. Which actually I appreciate. I was glad to not go out alone, and I was glad to not have like shredded the club, right? Because I didn't want to do that. I wanted to leave. They were welcome to do as they chose. So the first thing was Maryland Kunst's Fashion, right? MKDF. That was the first thing. The second thing then became HEMA Alliance, and that was a topic of discussion almost immediately. It was, what are we going to do? There were a lot of benefits to being in a big organization like the ARMA that we wanted to bring to like this backyard club culture that we knew existed in the U.S., but had no rallying point. Right? There was like the WMAW guys, and there was like ARMA, and then there was a whole bunch of other dudes with no connection to anybody else, except maybe they talked to each other online a little bit. And they didn't have access to like insurance or like a nonprofit logo they could kind of get behind to have, because I mean, I don't know how, for sure how it is in Europe, but I know in the U.S., like you walk into a location where you want to train, you say, hey, we want a sword fight. They're like, are you with somebody? Like, well, no. Do you have insurance? No. So you're just some dudes that you were in your backyard last week, and now you want to train in my YMCA, right? Like, yeah. And you're not gonna get anywhere. But within a week of setting up the HEMA Alliance, I could walk and say, hi, my name is Jake. I represent the HEMA Alliance, a 501c3 organization based da-da-da-da-da. We're a real nonprofit, and so we're legit, and you don't have to worry about letting us into your place to train. And so I wanted that. I wanted that right away, and I wanted it for me, and I wanted it for the community. And I felt right away this desire to like help the community, which in retrospect was probably pretty egotistical of me, but it seemed like a good idea at the time. What followed was pretty funny. In the early months of getting the HEMA Alliance set up, I became its face, even though I wasn't actually the guy who first thought of the thing. I had to negotiate between the various priorities of the 7 founders, which was relatively easy, but then negotiating the priorities of the 7 founders against the priorities of all the ex-ARMA people who needed a thing to join, and several other folks who were looking at us crazy like, is this going to be ARMA 2.0? And I ran into a lot of people who really just wanted ARMA 2.0. They wanted ARMA, but without John Clements. And they were hoping that I was going to be that guy, and I just was not going to be that guy. When we first built the thing, we built it so that I would be able to not be in charge for very long. I was acting president for a year, elected president twice, and then I backed out, and I've not been, formally involved in the HEMA Alliance political life since then. I resigned from the board earlier this year just because it was me backing further out, like let the creation breathe. But at that point, I guess, I transitioned from being a guy that people knew because I had a very positive online, persona, I guess, from the ARMA to this guy who was trying to be like a community leader and was actually helping people out. And then the HEMA Alliance thing worked, and then the Long Point thing worked. And between those two things, this sort of community figurehead in U.S. HEMA kind of stuck. Sometimes it's a blessing, and a lot of the times it's a curse, but I'm happy to serve in that role as long as people want me to.
Okay, well let's look at Long Point now. Why did it happen? I mean, what was your purpose with it basically, and when did it happen? Was it something that was one of the ideas that you wanted post ARMA, or well, you tell us.
Yeah, so post ARMA, about a year after ARMA was the first Mid-Atlantic HEMA gathering. Everything was a HEMA gathering back then. And the idea was just to have a local event because there were a lot of clubs in the area, and they had never talked to each other particularly. There was the Virginia Academy of Fencing and MASHES and the MEMAG and my club, and 1 or 2 other clubs floating around, plus other folks that were non-affiliated. And I thought, man, it'd be cool to get like everybody in the area together for a fencing event. At the same time, I was intrigued by this idea of HEMA competition, and it was already planning on going to the first Houston event, which later became Fectula America. I was already planning on going to that, and I had been in significant conversations with Scott Brown at the time, who ran that. So began experimenting with this idea of competing in HEMA, which in the ARMA world is like a super evil. It's like it's hardcore heresy. So like all folks who sort of leave their church or cult of choice, I was suddenly enamored with all the things that were like previously forbidden.
Sorry, Jake, can I stop you there? That's kind of a frivolous answer. There must have been slightly more to you wanting to have a competition basis in Long Point rather than just a reaction to armor?
Well, no. So remember that the very first Long Point wasn't really Long Point at all. It was just 30 dudes from the like Maryland, D.C., Virginia area. Then I went to Effectual America, and I was like, wow, this is the coolest thing ever. Competition's amazing. I met all these cool Swedes, and there was Axel and Anders and Lopez and Kit Smith and all these cool people from far away. And look how cool and big this environment is. And man, like, didn't Lopez and Axel kick like everybody's butt? And look how good the Europeans are. And everything I'd been told my whole life about like European HEMA was wrong. Right, which I was super thrilled to see. Like I was super thrilled to see, because I really hoped that was true. I had hoped that it was all worth it, right? And it totally was. And so I was really, really enthusiastic about this. So after my first competition at Effectual, well, it wasn't yet called Effectual America, but at what became Effectual America. I took third place in Dusac, losing to Lee Smith, and second place in Longsword, losing to Axel, and was just blown away by how much fun I had and how hard it had pushed me and how nervous I had been, and all of these things that kind of been missing from my training that I didn't even know were missing, were suddenly there. Plus, I'd made all these cool friends, so I wanted to do that. I wanted to have this cool experience where I lived, and I wanted the people where I lived to have that experience. So we set up a very first Long Point.
Yeah, so you actually had, therefore, a direct experience of competition, and that spurred you on, and that made you want to do it.
Yes, okay, absolutely.
Okay.
And we all have, actually, all in the U.S. at least, we all have Scott Brown to thank for that. I mean, Scott Brown is the guy who imported European-style HEMA competition to the U.S. So we set up the first Long Point, and way more people came than I thought were going to come. Somebody came from like Alaska, and Lee Smith came from like Canada, it surprised me. It was an international event before it was even meant to be anything more than a local event, to be honest. So the next year, even more people came, and we debuted the Long Point rules, which have sort of a weird origin story all of their own. And then that went really, really well, and people said really, really nice things. And then it just began to snowball, out of control. And I think it was in 2012, the first year that we did Long Point rules, that we realized we had something way bigger than a regional event on our hands, and that we had the potential to have something that was, one of the big events in the U.S. Mm-hmm. And I think honestly this has contributed to a wedge between Scott Brown and I, including Ben Michaels. But at the time I felt like there was this friendly rivalry between Effectual America and Long Point, and I really liked that. I mean, I fed off of it. Like, it excited me that there was kind of this idea that we would one up each other every year in kind of a friendly way. And the other thing was that I don't get to play at Long Point. Like, Long Point is work for me. And Effectual America was where I played. And so when people ask, hey, Jake, do I go to Effectual America or Long Point? I'm like, go to Effectual America so I can fight you, and then go to Long Point, So I always envisioned there being kind of several like really big events in the U.S., and I just wanted Long Point to be one of them. But as time went on, it got larger and larger and larger. We started opening registration earlier and earlier, largely because we had down payments we had to make for halls, and we couldn't pay for them without opening registration. As both you guys are involved in running events and have some sense of that. And the budget began ballooning, which is to say that the event got more and more expensive, and more people began coming. I remember having this conversation with the HEMA Alliance in probably 2013 or 2012. Yeah, probably 2012 or 2013, where they wanted us to, they had asked us to do something, some kind of concession to something that was good for the Alliance. And we looked at our books and we said, we can't. It's like, the event is too big. It costs too much money for us to do the thing that you're suggesting. And they're like, well, what do you mean? They're like, well, the event's up to $17,000 right now, guys. And I think that the HEMA Alliance board just blew their mind at the time that a HEMA event was costing that much money. To give you some sense of it, Long Point right now costs about $50,000 to run. So when people are like, man, HEMA events are expensive, they're like, that's right, they are. And there's no way that I can foot that bill by myself. So But yeah, so that's, I mean, it really happened kind of organically, but I'd be lying to you if I said that we didn't have, these kind of grandiose ideas, world conquest at some point, right? Like, we wanted Long Point to be huge. I didn't care if Long Point was bigger than anything else, but I wanted Long Point to be big. And we wanted it to surpass expectations and push envelopes and do all this kind of stuff. Because if you have to work a lot at something, and to be honest, working on Long Point like isn't fun, you want to come away with some sense of accomplishment. So I want everybody to have a good time. I want the competition to go great. I want people to be like, wow, look at this cool thing you guys did. Something that Axel Pedersen and I talk about a lot, which motivates both of us in a lot of the decisions we make, whether it's about our role in the community or even the way we train. It comes down to our grandchildren. I have immense respect for my grandfather. Like, I think my grandfather is this huge badass, fought in World War II, fought in Korea. He was this like Clark Gable mustache, dapper, like perfect picture of like an American infantry officer gentleman, right? and so to this day, he's like a legendary figure to me. I want to be a figure that my grandkids are like, whoa, really impressed with, things that were accomplished and things that were done, and I want my grandkids to be able to brag about their granddad. My kids are going to think I'm a nerd, that's fine, but my grandkids will think I'm cool. And that's, it's kind of funny, and I suppose there's an element of my own ego in that, right? Because why would I want that? And to some degree, maybe it's the Viking in me. There's this part of me that believes that you live on because of what your ancestors remember about you, and whether they sort of hold you in honor after your death, which from a surely scientific or even religious point of view is probably ridiculous, but that resonates with me. And so a great deal of what I do is for that, and any decision that I might make that would ruin that, that's when I have to like rein myself in, right? It's a major motivator. And that includes, with how Long Point got set up and how we run it today.
Do you feel that one criticism that is made, whether it's just or not, is open for debate about Swordfish, is that it's become too competition-centric, and that the workshops, which I think are very good, suffer somewhat. And one could say that about Long Point, certainly. The way you need to time the competitions through mean that some of the workshops suffer because the guys who would be doing workshops are staffing or competing.
Yeah, certainly.
I mean, do you feel that's gone perhaps too far down that way? Or?
I think, to be honest, I think it's only too far if the entire community goes that way. And that's actually what worries me more. I would personally be fine, and actually we're kind of playing around with this with some of our league events, as I know the Nordic League has done already, with some actual legitimate, like, the only reason you show up is to compete kind of events. And they're going to be less expensive and easier to run and whatnot. And you show up, you compete, you go home, it's like a day. I really like that idea. I also have this deep love for WMAW, which I've gone to for the last several years, because it is purely a workshop event. And the workshops are fantastic. And it also helps that it's kind of a different camp, right? It's a different group of people from what I normally hang out with, and I think that's one of the virtues of it. But that crossover is becoming more and more prominent now. So I'm really glad that exists, and I really wish there were more events like that. I wish there were more events like WMAW. I think Long Point and Swordfish both fill an important meeting place for those two things. And I think that people can say the classes at Swordfish take a second seat to the competition, but I got to tell you, I've taught at so many events, competition events, non-competition events. The students at Swordfish are no less excited, and the contents of the classes are no less powerful. So I think really it comes down to like a media perception thing. I know that we're trying to counter that at Long Point this year. We've added several instructor slots. We've increased the amount of money we're spending on flying instructors out, which is painful because it raises the price of the event. And so people are like, why is Long Point $25 more this year? It's like, well, because we're trying to fly more people out. We're trying to get more exotic instructors in here to teach cool things. We want to make sure that there's more than just the competition here. But let's be frank, right? What makes Swordfish different from WMAW is the competition and is the prestige that competition carries. And a lot of people would argue that competition shouldn't carry that much prestige. That's a longer discussion and probably worth having. But at least for now, it does, and I'm glad that it's happening in that place, and it helps that I trust the people that are running the event, right? Because I think as community leaders, especially as people who run events, we really have to be thinking about how our actions impact the future of the community. I talk with the other Long Point organizers about this continuously because we too have a fear. Are we pushing this too hard? Is competition to become too prominent? Are we emphasizing behaviors that are actually detrimental to the community? And sometimes we have to walk that line between, well, we're observing detrimental behaviors, but did we cause them? Can we prevent them? Because let's be honest, there's always been detrimental behaviors. I look back at Sword Symposium International in 2000, which had no competition whatsoever. There was lots of detrimental behavior going on back then, right? An entire country's HEMA scene splintered as a result of that event. So I think we need to be cautious about assigning blame to the big bad, just because, competition is evil, or elf shoes are evil, or, any other kind of approach to this is evil.
Well, no, Hans has got some questions coming up on that. On this with Long Point, though, what you gave this year a very, very eloquent speech, a rallying call as well, to basically everyone present and to the HEMA community, specifically in the States, to join together. We talk very much about family. Do you actually, is that your intention with Long Point? Do you feel that as a drawing together of the USC?
If it doesn't do that, and yet continues to grow, I'll think that I've failed. Long Point has to do one of two things. It either has to be where I go to hang out and fence with my friends, in which case I'm going to reduce the guest list, mostly for, these guys are all my friends, but I'm not going to spend a year putting an event together, for that. I'm not gonna risk $50,000 of my family's money for that. So so if that's the case, then yeah, I don't want to do that. Bringing community together at Long Point is really important. And there are a few things that pain me more than watching the community try to like fold in on itself and eat itself from time to time. Really bothers me. It bothers me to see anti-competition people and competition or die people arguing. I'm not a big fan of extremism of any kind of fold. So yes, I think it's very important to what Long Point is, to be bringing folks together. There's a limit to what that can do, but I intend to continue to push that limit until I can't anymore.
Okay, thanks. Hans?
Well, okay. We talked a little bit about Long Point versus Swordfish, and you talked also about meeting Axel, for instance, a European fencer for the first time.
Yeah.
Do you feel that there is a significant difference between American and European, or maybe Scandinavian fencing? American versus Scandinavian fencing, or American versus European that you have?
Yeah. So first I'm going to give you the answer that's just not nearly as much fun. There is no European fencing, and there is no American fencing. Neither of our communities are homogenous enough to actually have any kind of real claim to that. And all it takes is 5 minutes talking to Harry Winter, followed by talking to Lopez, followed by talking to Axel, followed by talking to literally any other person to make that clear. Right? There is no sort of one true European way. And there is no one true American way. So we tend to think in terms of the people that we see. So if we talk about the Americans who tend to show up to Long Point and the Europeans that tend to show up to Swordfish, right? If we talk about the competitors who cross the sea, then I think we can start to talk a little bit more about some consistencies, right? Because these tend to be slightly more homogenous groups from training approach or values, that kind of thing. And what I would say is that really, really deep down, I don't think the values are that much different. I think some training priorities are different, and I'm kind of glad that they are. And I'm going to be a little bit worried, to be honest, if we, as an American competitive community, don't learn from some of the stuff that you guys are going through right now. And at the same time, preserve some of the things we have, which I think make us unique. I would love to see some of those things that we're doing well adopted over in Europe, and I would love to see the opposite happen, here, right? I wrote a fairly well-known at this point blog a while back about Vikings taking our medals, and and it's funny because some people said, well, is there, interpreted that as some sort of statement of rivalry or of declaring war, and it wasn't actually. I was calling American fencers to task because they were complaining about losing. Yeah. And the gross majority of American fencers don't put in the kind of hours that come out of the top-level competitive European fencers. Now, the average European fencer doesn't put in those many hours either, let's be honest, right? I think it was Matt Easton made a good point that really, Sweden was exporting its best, and that was a big part of the reason that, we were getting our asses handed to us in Texas. And that's true. That's definitely true. But at the same time, I've fought Axel and Dennis many, many times, and Axel just handed me Axel handed me my ass back in 2011, and Dennis handed me my ass a couple of months ago at ILHG. And that, in both cases, that came down to training. It came down to how much they train, came down to how they train, and that's something that I think if we're going to be honest with ourselves as a fencing community, much less a competitive community, if we're going to be honest with ourselves, that's something we need to emulate, right? Guys at the top of their game in the Scandinavian circuit train 4 or 5 days a week. They have intensive physical training regimens on top of their like sword fighting training regimens, and it draws me back to something that I had observed maybe 10, 15 years ago, which is until we have someone who trains at least as much as a high school athlete, we won't really have any amazing performers in our community. Well, we have that now, right? We have people who train as much as I trained to play football in high school, 4 or 5 days a week, 1 to 2, 3 hours a day, right? So that's something that needs to happen here in the U.S. We need more people who train with the kind of intensity and kind of regularity that the top-level Scandinavian fencers are putting in, and that is one of the biggest things we can learn. The other thing is the culture of coaching that we see in Scandinavian schools, right? If there's 2 Swedes in a room, it doesn't matter how big rivals they are, right? If you're not fighting one of them, the other one is in the corner, right? Yeah. And that's a very, very powerful thing because it's in the military it's what we would call a force multiplier. A good coach can take an average fighter and turn them into a great fighter for a couple of minutes, and that's something that we don't have. Every competition I've ever been in up until fairly recently, I've had somebody in my corner maybe hold my mask for me for a minute, but and maybe to whisper a little bit of advice here or there, but not like a coach, not somebody I worked with regularly, not somebody who knew me and who I knew on that training kind of teacher-student kind of level. So that's something that we're slowly beginning to develop here in the U.S., and I think that's beginning to show in some of our competitive performance against you guys, frankly, where we're improving. The other kind of little bit of controversy, and all of that was after the article came out, there was a lot of discussion about, in the article, Jake, you mentioned that there's a couple things that Americans do better than Europeans. So, what are those? And I was reluctant to answer because people are babies. And to be honest, I shouldn't have answered because people are babies. Yeah. But I was foolish and answered. And so I still think some of those things are true, and I think that there are fencers in Europe who are doing a very good job of emphasizing historicity in their training and in their performance. Names that stick out to me, Christian Roukonen, Arto Fama, and I'm talking about guys that are also within the competitive scene. There's a bunch of guys not in the competitive scene, but they live and breathe historicity in their training, right? There's guys that I've never seen at Swordfish and probably never will, who know Dobringer or Fontenzig or Lekushner like the back of their hand. They incredible, great, real historical fencing and interpreters and practitioners, but they're not competitors. And the guys who interest me most are the ones who are able to take the historical stuff and the competition and merge those. And if you're just a competitor not doing historical stuff, frankly, I don't care that much about you. You don't excite me as a fencer, and I actually, deep down inside, feel that you're probably a threat to our entire community. Because if they're a necessary evil, because I, as a historical fencer, need to be able to defeat them with my historical fencing. And if I can't, then my historical fencing is lacking. But I want the gross majority of people thinking like that, not the opposite. I don't want historical European sword sport, right? I want competition as a really grisly pressure test for historical fencers. Yeah. And so those are the fencers that excite me the most, that I'm most interested in watching. And there are fencers out there who have taken, I think there's been a sort of a rising tide of fencers who maybe aren't known for doing that, trying to do that more as a personal challenge and in order to bolster their reputation. Reputation is a very powerful motivation in any community. And that makes me happy, but at the same time, I'm seeing more and more fencers who are saying things like, well, sources are cool and all, but I just want to really do well in competition. And I hate hearing that, and it traumatizes me when I hear that, here in the U.S. And I used to not believe it. Like, it'd be like, nobody says that. I don't know what you're talking about, because nobody says it to me. But as it turns out, people are actually saying it, and it makes my eye twitch a little. So what I would, say to people coming to Long Point is, I want to see you bring your historical game, and if you're not, I don't care if you win. I think you suck. So anyway.
I just have to say that I feel exactly the way you do, Jake. It's it sometimes feels like, oh, they just want to win medals, and it just feels like a knife in my heart. Yeah. Why? Why do you care about them? What then you could win medals in badminton or something else.
Right, so, right, yeah. I mean, if you're just trying to if you just want a medal, go go get a medal, right? And we have a responsibility to try to shut those guys out and to outcompete them. There are some instances where the artificialities of competition are in their favor, but anytime I hear somebody using that excuse, I think it's an excuse, right? I think that while there's going to be certain things will work better in the game than work in real life, right? Because we're all going to fight with real sharp swords all the time, right? In real life. It's just, I just find that excuse super unconvincing, right? Oh, he's not a better fencer. He just, just because the swords are blunt, that's why, and he's fast. I'm like, okay, well, maybe you can use a historical counter to his being fast, right? How would you do that, right? The Masters never had this problem. They never dealt with a guy who was stronger and faster, had a longer sword, and was a douche. I'm pretty sure they did. So, that's what I'm interested in.
Yeah, it's certainly something that Hans and I talk about a lot. Is why the hell do we lose yet again? Well, sports fencers. Well, is it? Or maybe we just we're sucking today, something like that. And okay, so I'm going to press you a little bit on the competition. I mean, you say that in your heart of hearts we are in fact not dissimilar. There is no real difference. However, this year at Long Point, there was great joy that Americans were winning.
Oh, sure.
The majority of the competitions, and naturally, there is a bit of flag waving, and absolutely nothing wrong with that.
Sure.
Let's look at the future. I, for one, think there will be a contingent at Long Point next year who will be looking to come back harder and tighter, maybe.
Yep.
What's your projection?
No, I think that's absolutely true. I think that there's going to be a contingent, right? We know their names. You can look them up on a Google Doc right now, in fact. There's definitely going to be a contingent of Europeans that are coming hard and fast, and they want to take that title, right? Good. Right, good. In particular, here's the title that I want them to gun for. Here's the title that I'm challenging them, that I'm telling them that I don't... Ooh, how bold do I want to get? I don't think you can...
Go.
Right? Ooh, issuing a challenge.
Yeah,
I challenge that contingent to come win the real prize at Long Point, which is the triathlon.
Okay.
Open longsword yippee, right? It's fantastic, and we were thrilled. I mean, the Americans were thrilled that Dustin Reagan won. And some of it was because, yay, Dustin's an American, so it's a convenient excuse for flag waving, like every other country has done when their people have won before them. But those of us that know Dustin, which is a lot of the Long Point crowd, know that he's like the best fencer in the country who has never won first place in a longsword tournament. He is so good, so it was a lot of us when we were cheering weren't just cheering, at American one. We were specifically cheering that Dustin won. That was pretty cool to us, as his friends. And one of the strengths and weaknesses of our community, especially competitively, is that we're all friends here. And it's kind of worse when we're not. But so I think that had a lot to do with it. We were really excited to see Dustin win, just because it was Dustin and what we knew that meant for him. But also it meant that somebody had sort of picked up the gauntlet and had gone and said, look, Vikings, you can't take this medal this year. And I know full well the Vikings intend to come back and with a vengeance come and get it. And, are they going to pull that off? They have a very good chance of pulling that off, right? There are a lot of really good fencers. Is Dustin going to compete this year? Is he going to be, on his A game? What other rising fencers do we have that are getting there, right? Mackenzie Ewing did very, very well at Swordfish this year, right? But, kind of had Anders Leonard in a tight spot for quite a while. That's exciting for us. And I think it has more to do, honestly, with our fencers beating the best fencers out there than like what country those fencers come from, right? It's pretty exciting anytime an American fencer beats Axel Ortiz or any of these other sort of big name fencers, because that's an objective accomplishment, right? Look at our progress as fencers. It's pretty exciting. But yeah, I think it's going to come out. What I want to see genuinely is I want to see a European come and win the triathlon. And the reason I want to see a European come and win the triathlon is because there are skills featured in the triathlon which are not historically the publicized strength of the European competitive community, right? There are Europeans out there who spend a lot of time cutting, but up until very recently, they have not been synonymous with the Europeans who compete. Same with a lot of like strict manual interpretation, a lot of these kinds of things. So I want to see, Teese emailed me the other day and said, hey, Jake, I registered for the triathlon. It was the most exciting thing I had seen all day. I'm really excited about that. Teese is a very gifted fencer. He's also one of the fencers who I think if he were able to pick up the torch of historical fencing with a vengeance, think about the good he could do for the community as you and I envision it, right? This truly historical focused community. What we want to do is not be like, shame on you competitors, you guys aren't historical. What we want to be doing is, hey guys, let's tap into your competitive natures to make you the best historical fencers possible. Let's make that the example to follow. That's very much become the theme of Long Point. And for that reason, I want a European to win it, because then they're going to go home and they're going to be like, hey guys, this is pretty cool. We should be doing this. And that's going to impact the interpretations. It's going to impact the rules. It's going to impact the competitions. And we can see more movement towards, martial arts over martial sports.
Do you really think so? Do you honestly think that?
I do honestly think so.
Counter that, do you think they're actually going to want to come out and bring it back, or are they coming out there to win the medal and to show, we beat this in whatever game? Are they actually going to be going back and say, we're going to make ourselves more martial now because this is representative of a martial tradition, and change what we do?
No, I think you're kind of reading it wrong. I don't think they're going to come back and say we're going to be more martial because we're representing a martial tradition. I think they're going to come back and they're going to say we're going to be more martial because it's something else we can win in.
That's exactly what I'm driving at. That's exactly what I'm driving at. Do you feel, however, that the impetus is therefore misplaced in that we want to just win, we want to prove we're better, rather than actually we are going to? I'm not saying this is actually what my viewpoint is. I'm just trying to be advocate here. Do you actually feel they're wanting to represent historical fencing, or do they want to get that medal?
Listen, I want to watch historical fencing, meaning the execution of historical techniques in their appropriate context, I want to see that flourish. If I have to bribe, cajole, convince, manipulate, and hang out a carrot and stick called competition to make that happen, I will freaking do it. Because if there's one thing that I will say, and this is unpopular with my non-competitive friends, is that the best physical performers of what we do are the high-level competitors. And if there's anybody out there who can take those original arts and make them sing the way that they were meant to sing, it's the high-level competitors. We just have to convince the high-level competitors that it's in their best interest to do so. And I don't really care how I get there. I just want to see it happen. I want to see all the techniques that I know are out there coming out in their right context. You know, I want to have enough fencers when on this planet when I die, who have genuinely mastered Lichtenauer's art, that it will not perish again. And if that means I'm going to use competition as a tool to attract people to that art, then I will. The fear, of course, is that competition will attract them away from that art, and that's the evil underbelly, right? And that is absolutely something that keeps me up at night. You know, do I see it happening? Of course I see it happening. But these things aren't binary, right? We have people going away and we have people moving towards. And as long as I have a critical mass of people moving towards, I'm not that concerned about people going away.
But where does that leave people who maybe not so proficient in competition or just aren't interested in competition?
I don't see why they can't benefit from the fruits of the experimentation that comes out of competition. You know, the people who say, I'm not interested in competition, but then are kind of like butthurt about not getting all of the accolades that come from competition, are in fact quite interested in competition, right? Yeah. They're not interested in the same competition, but in this competition for accolades and this competition for honor, they're absolutely involved. And so they feel like they're losing the competition for street cred to the guys who are competing for plastic, right, which is what metals are made out of. So, and that's, I'm just not that sympathetic to that point of view. I think if you are not interested in competition, then you're not interested, and keep on doing what you're doing, man. Some of the teachers I respect the most and have learned the most from are not interested in competition. I don't think any less of those guys. You know, did it take me some maturing to be able to say that honestly? Yes, it did. But and will it take other members of our community some maturing to be able to say that honestly? Yes, it will. You know, but you know, shoot, man. You know, there's people to be learned from in this community and outside of this community, regardless of their viewpoint on competition. One of the things we're trying to do in Long Point this year is bring in more instructors who are the non-competitive variety, because I think they're not instructors that a lot of our audience has seen before. So I think that'll be an attractive thing for them. But also I hope to show some of these guys, hey, look at some of the cool stuff that can come out of this. You know, have them introduced to the motivations of the average competitor, because the motivations of the average competitor are not the same as the motivations of the top level competitor. We had 100 some odd people fencing in open longsword in Long Point last year. You know, maybe 10 of them had a shot at winning, right? Maybe 15, maybe 16, not more than that. So, you know, if somebody joins the competition knowing that they're probably not going to win, are they doing it for a medal? Clearly not, right? They have no expectation of winning a medal. So why are they doing it? What value are they getting out of it if they don't get to be famous and, you know, get a free sword and get a piece of plastic they can hang on their wall, right? Why are they doing it then? Clearly there's something else involved in that experience that's valuable to them, right? And some of it's just improvement, because maybe next year they'll get closer, and next year they'll get closer, and next year they'll get closer. You know, in some cases that's going to be the case, but in a lot of other cases it's because competition provides a unique opportunity to fence in a style and under an intensity that's not available anywhere else. And I think that we as a community that criticizes competition just need to be honest that there's a lot more to it than the top three.
Okay. Hans, do you have any additional questions?
I only have a last question. Is that it?
I think we are. Yeah, we've got possibly the most important question, which Hans has got to ask right now.
Yes, Jake. Imagine you're at Long Point, a sports fencer who don't really care at all about historical manuals or anything, and never heard about it. He wins the triathlon. You get so upset and angry, you say like, "Oh my God, what is this?" And you turn around, you just want to slap somebody.
Yeah.
Who do you want to be? Who do you want to see there, standing there, so you can just put that slap right over his face? Who would that be?
Scott Hellroth, without hesitation. Scott Hellroth.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Good answer.
Okay.
We would support you in that, definitely.
Yeah, we could actually perhaps have some sort of a charity whip round to get into Long Point, just if you wanted to.
Yeah, I think we can start doing that.
We could get like a booth going. Like, I don't know if you guys have these in Europe, probably not because you're too civilized. But once upon a time, there was a thing called a kissing booth at like the State Fair in the U.S. Right, where some pretty girl would stand up there and you'd like pay $1 to charity and then she'd give you a kiss. We should do that with Scott, right? Like a slapping booth.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to see an airplane. I think I know.
Yeah, I mean, I could probably fund not just having Scott come out, but like the rest of Long Point, at about like $5 a slap. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. A slap-a-thon. I like it. Okay, Jake, that was absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much.
Great, Jake. Thank you so much for doing this.
No, my pleasure. Thank you guys for having me. I really appreciate it.
Awesome.
Okay.
Awesome.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.